Welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast, where we aim to educate and inspire you about how technology is changing and shaping our profession. The truth is, there's never been a more exciting time to be in procurement, but only if you're one of those organizations that's embracing the change and driving new developments. And this podcast is all about giving you the tools to help you get there. So buckle up and let's get right into this week's show. Yes, hello, very warm welcome to another episode of the Procurement Software Podcast. We are the only podcast that focuses solely on procurement technology. And today we're going to dig into another case study of how an innovative and entrepreneurial procurement practitioner has taken existing tools that are not tailored specifically towards procurement and has managed to design that to be able to give a pretty robust intake system, and then has bolted that onto an external procurement tech solution to give the complete requirements. So this one's all about triaging your budget and making the most of what you've got. And I'd like to welcome our guest today, who is Oscar Fernandez. Welcome, Oscar. Good to have you.
Hi, James. Thank you for having me. Big honor to be here. Sorry.
Awesome. So we've chatted a couple of times in the past, and you've been on a couple of live streams that I've done, which I always appreciate having friendly face on there. And then when we got to chat shortly after I recorded the episode, actually the last one that we did with Brian talking about Airtable, you mentioned to me that you managed to put together a pretty decent intake to requisition process using an existing IT ticketing tool called Jira. We'll come to that in a little while as we dig in. But first of all, Oscar, I just wanted to set the context a little bit. And if you could give me perhaps a bit of a brief tour of your professional career, because you're from Mexico, but you spent pretty much all of your professional career in Germany, correct?
And now that you put it that way, yes. So I studied industrial engineering, have an MBA, 10 years of automotive industry background. Now 8 years with procurement experience. Didn't start in procurement, but I think that's no surprise here in the field. And 5 years ago, I jumped into the tech space where I was Principal Procurement at FreeNow. And last year, I founded my company, ProCREWment, small procurement advisory, helping out companies to optimize their spend and procurement processes. Now, to what you say. So yeah, I live in Hamburg, and it's been now 11 years. 11 years I've been here, caught. So I started working at 2010. So yes, most of my professional life here. Yeah.
Awesome. And what does FreeNow do for anyone that's not familiar with them as a company?
In Europe, the biggest ride hailer. So you would get as competitors mainly what you know about Uber. So it's a marketplace ride hailing. In the UK, for those probably on your audience, they acquired back in the days Halo, which used to be a big company in there. And I mean, the company over the last 10 years was in hypergrowth as well. So I think it's not a surprise when you're in the tech business that you actually want to strive for that. So a lot of acquisitions, a lot of market expansion. And with that growth comes also, quite some big costs, right? Yeah.
So how big back then was your procurement team? So when you were at the start of this digital journey, how many people did you have in procurement at FreeNow?
So I started in 2020, literally in the day the pandemic hit. That was my first day at FreeNow. There were 2 other people and 2 interns helping us in there. I mean, you need to picture this, right? So to have in all these departments, so you're talking about growth of no cost, but you have in all these departments, all these fancy and amazing tools, right? World-class players. Customer care, you have Zendesk. You have sales, you have Salesforce. You have HR, Workday. You have all these amazing tools in there. And when you go back to finance, what do you think you were using, right? Starts with an E.
And is it made by Microsoft?
When I came, actually, there was already in place for our requisite purchase order request within the ticketing system, Jira. We had already kind of like a very basic workflow in there just to make the intake and then basically the approvals, right? Everything else was done in emails. If we go from the whole, let's say, procure to order or even pay. Everything very manual. I mean, a payment approval used to get on Tuesdays, just, an Excel being in like, okay, this is what we're actually going to pay out. Can you check in whether there was a PO or not? It was like your Tuesday task. Just go in there and be like, oh, was there a PO? Yes. Okay. Yeah, that can be paid with. No, then block it, right? So why block it? But okay, then block it and then let the vendors talk to you, right? Why there was not a PO. Very manual driven, email heavy. Rolling back again. Okay, what happened in there? Why was this payment done, right? The invoice approval threshold is also different to what the procurement thresholds were. The contract checks and data processing agreements when we talk about software, filling out a template on email, it was actually chaos. Yeah. Security and IT, they also had their own projects in Jira, but there was no way any of them were communicating. So basically if you want to see my process, we were all running blind and doing work twice or three times, right?
Yeah. And if I quote the great philosopher Tom Jones, it's not unusual in those types of situations because in any high growth tech company, or even in the average mid-sized manufacturing business, most of them still, even in 2025, are running fairly manual processes for business spend management, requisition to pay, tactical spend. So I don't think that's particularly unusual. Sorry, you wanted to, yeah.
No, and exactly. And this is why I think it's so relevant, even though, I've been now over a year and a half out of the company, just by seeing what we actually did there, it's still so relevant today, even though that started, a couple of years back. And especially seeing, for instance, your last episode with Brian, chapeau to Brian, masterclass, definitely worth listening if you haven't, and speaking to you, the listener right now.
So taking that situation then with what you found, and as you explained, there was a basic Jira system in place for requisition approval, but the rest of it was pretty manual. Walk me through then from going in and observing that. Walk me through the steps that you took then in terms of looking at, okay, how can you optimize that? And what solutions did you initially look at as part of that exercise?
Yeah, I guess to really have, I think it's important to talk about the trigger of what made us also think of, okay, what can we improve, right?
Yeah.
It is, so we were also in growth in the department because we were covering more spend. So it was, those years at the beginning, it was more about trying to convince everyone, right, to raise a ticket and, raise a ticket, let's follow the process, try to be compliant in the process to then having, pretty much cover a lot of that spend that we had there, which was basically professional services and tech, that the team started growing as well. We had to, get more interns to actually do that manual work, that coordination and, that email management, if you want to call it. But also just tackling all the spend, right? So it was quite messy. And that growth, we were up to 10 people in the department just because of those inefficiencies. So that was actually the triggering point where we actually started looking, okay, what we have, can we get it somewhere else better? Or what do we do, right? And initially, so this is the funny thing. So we were actually, because we were starting to manage a lot of RFPs. So the hook in there was to try to find a sourcing tool that would help us just on that. But, we didn't have seen what else could we fix from the whole process. All the big guys were invited to that RFP. So you had the Coupas, the Evaluas, the SAP Ariba, the GEP, the Cycus. And all of them, of course, in offering that module, that sourcing module, of course, with the hope of like onboarding us into
P2P and the rest of the suite,
right? Which I'm not going to lie, and I'm not going to mention the name, but from one of them, I was very persuaded and seduced. I was really thinking, actually, this is the solution. This is the way to go. If we talk about what Jira has from a UI perspective, for instance, which is actually the first thing, you get that impression of, it's not sexy.
Yeah.
It's just not sexy. I'm not going to lie. Whereas the others would have actually really cool features, really nice buttons where I thought, wow, this is actually what we need, right? The issue here was, so when we were that far in the process, we saw also, first of all, budget, also not a surprise, big constraint when you're talking about over $250,000, $500,000, just to implement some stuff like that. And not only that, even at heavy discounted prices for the whole suite, right? But not only that, just getting that, I like to relate it with that IKEA shelf, for instance. You buy that shelf, right? But now you need to unpack it and actually assemble it,
and
right?
Need to make it work.
It's the same thing with the suite. And you're talking about at least 6 months, right? Of implementation, of putting in their project management team, of making that change management, everything in there. When, so all these things that were actually against it for that beautiful suite actually made us sit back and think, well, we could actually, what we have already, we could actually just like improve it, automate it, and iterate. I mean, we have the flexibility to actually start, in sprints or 2 weeks cycles with the IT to start looking what is working, what not, and keep improving simply. It was super flexible on that.
So I want to come back to that because you raise an interesting point. And I'm sometimes, for anyone that listens to this regularly, I am sometimes harsh on the legacy solutions, but I also acknowledge that there is a time and a place where it makes sense to implement one of those tools. But that would typically be in a large corporate organization that has center of excellence team, that has a lot of IT resource, or maybe has an external budget to go out and hire a bunch of consultants to come in and do the implementation. If you were in a team of, let's say, 10-ish procurement people at that point in a rapid growth tech company, you've not got that level of procurement maturity to really, give that ROI, and you've not got the enough resource to really wrap your arms around it and ensure the user adoption. Because the challenge with all of these tools is, in theory, they're feature-wise, they're all pretty good, but to be able to onboard people both internally and also suppliers and get the high level of usage that you need to justify the business case, that's tough in an organization that's not at a high level of maturity.
You just really, I think you nailed it, because the maturity level you are in within your function, your procurement function, actually says already a lot of what you actually can do or where you should be heading to, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we were in that very reactive mode of just trying to troubleshoot and, trying to get visibility on the whole spend. But again, we had Jira, so everyone also within the company managing their tasks and projects used Jira. So from that user adoption perspective, everyone was still in there, even though, and again, we spent extensive months in there trying to really, put in every time we were getting, a Slack message was, hey, can you help me out with this negotiation, blah, blah. Where's the ticket, right? So we actually also had to spend a lot of time trying to onboard them within Jira also to our process. But then having done all that and then move them again to another tool would have been quite messy.
Yeah, I agree. And that you hit on a good point that it might not be the best user experience in the world and it might not be the most feature-rich tool. But if you've got one of the major obstacles already overcome to any tech transformation, which is user adoption, if they're already using it to create IT tickets, then I think what I'm curious to understand, especially for anyone that's listening to this that uses Jira, I've never used it, by the way, just for context. So, talk to me like a 5-year-old in terms of how it works. I've never used it. Is this just an IT project then, essentially then to just understand, what features and use cases does Jira have that could be adapted to what you need for intake to PO, essentially?
Well, it's in essence a project management tool, and you can customize your workflows depending on those steps that you have within your project or your tasks. What we did was, how it started was just you have the very basic intake, you create a purchase order request, it lands in the backend to the procurement manager, and then he hits, okay, yeah, I've seen this, it's in progress. And once you've, negotiated that spend, collected approvals, you close the ticket. That would be very basic, and that's actually what we had back then.
Yeah.
But then we just injected steroids. We partnered up with the IT to actually make that very more holistic. And we improved those workflows, first of all, on the intake, so that we could actually start dividing a little bit into categories to see, okay, if it's a software, you get a different workflow towards getting, an IT check does this tool has SSO or do we have it already? And security, right? SOC 2, pen test, ISO 27001, compliance, legal. So actually within our kind of like, enhancement in procurement, we actually were able to convince legal to also bring in their processes to Jira. And it was also brilliant for the user because they would see transparently where that request was actually stuck. Was it in security in their assessment? Was it in the contract check? Was it a compliance check? Was it in IT? So we actually were able to cope in and fit in the workflows of the other departments within our existing workflow, and depending on what was being bought, right? That was really already a really good win. Approvals used to take also ages because they were on a waterfall kind of like approach. So if the one guy got it stuck for 2 weeks, it would get stuck in there, and then you would have to get out of the process, send again an approval email to get everything ongoing. We just restructure all that, having parallel approvals around peers, and then when you needed C-level approval, it would after that just go to them, just to increase that flexibility. We would get POs send out of there with an automation. Finance was using for the whole invoice approval management a tool called Yooz. I don't know if
Yooz,
it rings.
Yeah, I know Yooz. Yeah.
Okay. So basically everything was done there. They also migrated their manual process, what I explained in the beginning, towards that tool, and the IT connected basically all that information that was coming in from the invoices and was actually helping us to match it with our purchase orders. And it was that check, for instance, was seamlessly easy. So the IT used for automating everything that was outside of Jira a tool called Workato.
Yeah.
And this is basically a connector. It's very simple or quite similar, I think more powerful than what Make and AN and Zapier are doing.
Yeah.
But just to relate, that was basically our connector towards the other systems. And then, of course, we used more modules within the Atlassian ecosystem. So within Jira, you have some other things like assets, where we would there just basically create that database on, for instance, cost centers, contracts, create those automatic notifications for renewals, get everything connected with Slack. We then had also another module called EasyBI, where there we would track based on all the invoice information or all the bunch of invoices we're getting from Yooz, connect that into also database within assets, and then display it, as our spend cube. Give us all that also in Lifetime, which was also a tool that we had in Google Sheets or Excel.
So if I can just summarize and just jump in if I've got any of this wrong. So your intake to PO was done through Jira, then
only, yeah.
Yeah, and then you were using Workato, which, as I understand it, is like a custom build a bot or build an type of software. And then finance for their invoice to pay process, we're using Yooz. They weren't using an ERP for that.
They were using Yooz for the whole invoicing approval, and then with all the reconciliation was going through an ERP as the central.
Okay, so there was an ERP that actually paid the vendor, but the actual workflow and the process itself was done in Yooz, and then it just pushed it to the ERP that was linked up to to Treasury and the supplier's bank account to actually push the payment to them. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. And then on the back of that, with the data that you had, you also managed to, you said, do contract expiry notifications and have some sort of basic spend cube as well?
Correct. So the whole renewal issue that always comes up where you miss renewals and then you need to get the stock, or do you need to go in those tough discussions with vendors on like, what else can you do, right? Because you already, we were able to fix that through that database and those notifications. So it would automatically create a ticket for the procurement manager to actually look in that. And of course, depending on the threshold or on the amount of spend, those tickets would come in advance, whether if it's 270 days, 90 days, 180 days, whether you would need a sourcing event or not, so again, I think this all wouldn't been possible without the help of IT.
Yeah.
So for instance, when I hear Brian being and doing everything himself, seriously, amazing. But here was rather more the business partnering approach with IT. Like they also wanted to automate more in the company. They had automated a lot of HR processes. And I said, oh, well, why not in procurement? Let's do that, right? And onboarding them, trying to understand what procurement actually does and, our process and how things should actually work. It was actually quite fun because they would also just, without knowing anything, it was like, hey, but why are you following this? Why cannot we do it this way, right? So it was actually so important to have them as our right arm, basically, for the whole process.
That's really cool. So business partnering and just dealing with the tools that you already have. So I want to come back to, because you mentioned earlier on that as you grew as a business, you were doing more and more RFPs, and that was becoming more and more of a critical activity. And I mean, I know from when we spoke previously, before we set up the interview, that one of the pieces of tech that you did invest in was a standalone e-sourcing tool. So you obviously had to triage your budget in terms of what you go out and spend money on. Walk me through the logic of why an e-sourcing tool won that competition instead of, let's say, spend analytics or SRM or, well, P2P, we kind of know because you've already explained it. And then what drove you specifically to choose the solution that you did?
Okay, so let me try to break that down. So with what we saw throughout this sourcing event we did about looking at, we saw, okay, what we could actually boost internally. So we said, okay, we don't have that budget, right? So what can we do internally to actually, get close to that, beautiful, at least, suite that it's out there being sold. And that's actually that was in our power to actually modify and change and drive. Where we saw that, for instance, Jira would have that limitation was with the sourcing. And we said, okay, here actually we need to get out. Now, why did we choose, or we chose through a sourcing rather than SRM or spend analytics? Again, the spend analytics parts, we basically covered it in there within Jira. Tableau was used widely in the company. So that could have been a point that would at the later stage could be also onboarded. SRM within, and again, back to that, within our procurement maturity level, we were not there yet. And I actually would challenge within the tech space, especially when you're talking about indirect procurement, how many companies within procurement are actually evaluating their suppliers other than on the RFP stage. So the post-contract.
Yeah, and I think it is a fair point. I mean, SRM oftentimes is, while you can do it with indirect suppliers, typically the trigger is more on direct spend. I would agree with you on that. Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. You have quality, which plays the delivery. So those are main drivers actually to have that conversation, right? So yeah, sourcing. Again, hundreds of emails in there within, if you're inviting 8 vendors and just managing that through email and calls and then seeing where was the last file that was sent. And it was just tough to get, just a grip on pretty much the whole admin of it. So that was the driver. And we said, okay, and the investment in there for the amount of sourcing events we were actually triggering would pay off easily. So that was a no-brainer. In there, we chose to work with DeepStream.
Yeah.
And again, so we did look for also smaller, I would say, solutions, which I'm not going to name because DeepStream was actually the winner. But what I liked from DeepStream was it was very intuitive. And when you had this mindset or this whole thing in mind that you would need 6 to 9 to 12 months to implement and to transform your procurement process, when DeepStream came in and said, I need, if you want 1 week, 2 weeks, and then we can get going, that was already for us a no-brainer.
Yeah. I mean, I know the guys at DeepStream pretty well, and this is not sponsored by DeepStream. We're not pushing
Absolutely
them, but
not.
I've seen their products, and I know that it is very easy and very versatile to implement, as are some of their direct competitors too. But certainly, the big suites are not that easy. And DeepStream, as with any standalone e-sourcing source-to-contract tool, if you don't have to integrate it with your ERP and the UX is that intuitive that it doesn't require a lot of training, completely agree with you. You should be able to be up and running in a week or two. And yeah, part of the challenge with e-sourcing, or at least my experience was historically back in my practitioner days, was just getting suppliers hated using them because they were so difficult to register on these different e-sourcing tools. So if you've got a tool like DeepStream, anything that's similar to DeepStream out there in the marketplace that enables 1 or 2 click onboarding and doesn't ask you for pages and pages of compliance data to be able to participate in an e-auction or in an ERFX, that's going to improve the level of adoption that you get from suppliers before you have the battle of, getting your internal team on board with using it, right? It's half the battle won.
Yeah. And I mean, so alone, I think for us, and especially when I was carrying out those RFPs, the main take, I would say, regardless of DeepStream, but of having a sourcing tool, is that I would actually focus more in preparing my negotiation and, going more actively into that preparation, getting those facts rather than looking, okay, where was the last email and the last offer, because everything that was automatically in there, in place, it was visible. It was super transparent also to just like put in their stages, so you have different events throughout your RFP, and that was super transparent. For me, I mean, just because I was not just doing one RFP, but also to the vendors, which is also fair, right? They need to know where they're sitting, if they were shortlisted or not, right? Communication was also something that was handled within the platform, unless, of course, you had the demos and the calls and meetings. But that was already a very big. They took a lot of that big, heavy chunk of admin stuff that would allow me to prepare better, to actually get what I was actually paid for, right? To get savings. So the ROI was twofold. It was driving savings because you could put more events through it because it was easier to run than doing it on email and Excel. But it also gave you the time to enable you to prepare the negotiation better, which it's always difficult to measure the results of that, but you're probably then going to get a better result from the supplier that you're selecting to take forward to contract with just through having that time to prepare properly instead of juggling emails and trying to fiddle around with doing analysis inside of spreadsheets. Absolutely.
Yeah. What type of spend were you typically putting through there? What types of categories?
Over 100 grand per year.
But I mean, in terms of what commodities or what categories of spend?
Well, technology. So everything in software. And again, I mean, we had a really nice, we were accustomed to use world-class tools in there. So those were actually quite fun to actually tender. Professional services. So you have the marketing, you have also advisory, right? Whether it's tax, legal, and some other professional services mainly. So at FreeNow, we were talking about indirect procurement. And within that threshold that I was just saying, those 2 categories were the ones that were fitting in there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I know that those, certainly DeepStream can also run direct spend too. So it must be pretty versatile in terms of being able to cover them both. Okay. So just conscious of the time, Oscar, and wanting to wrap this up. So I wanted to ask you one final question, which was, what advice would you give to other heads of procurement in a similar situation that you were in at FreeNow that have a pretty limited budget, but also, as you did when you went in, you saw a huge potential to improve or digitize a lot of highly administrative or manual processes?
I would say, seriously, just take the money and run. So I would say, look your setup. Understand, first of all, understand your business, understand what you have in there, your stack, and see what you can actually apply to yourself. Again, I think with my case, it was Jira, but I mean, we've seen already other cases where it's a complete different setup. And start with something. Start with one of the, within your maturity level, start breaking up which is the biggest pain point, and then from there extend. Don't go and try to cover everything at once. I would say that would be the best advice I would give.
So find the biggest pain point and run a pilot on that, and then grow and build from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Okay. You mentioned at the start that you're now running your own sort of freelance procurement advisory consultancy. So do you specialize in this stuff, the digitization, or is it more general sort of procurement process improvement?
I mean, at this stage, it's pretty much a little bit of everything. So I'm doing interim management for a manufacturing company right now. But I also have some people working in specific, I would say, procurement projects. It can be from rather just contract negotiation, help me out to optimize this, to also building or enhancing a procurement process. So yeah, also quite not boring, I would say.
What's the website? And I'll link to it in the show notes if anyone wants to reach out.
ProCREWment. So just go to ProCREWment.com. Very basic. My slogan is actually making procurement easy.
So ProCREWment as in shipping crew.
As in, we're part of your crew. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Awesome, Oscar. Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I love these case studies of how people are able to improvise and just, take their creativity and solve a problem with the resources that they have. So if you're out there and you've got a case study similar to Oscar's or similar to Brian's on the previous episode, and you'd like to come on and tell the world about it, then please drop me a DM on LinkedIn or fire me an email at james@procurementsoftware.site. We'd love to hear from you, and we will happily bring you on to talk about your success stories, because I love these case studies. And I think the more of them that we have, the more inspiration that we will give to people in similar situations that are perhaps in pretty budget-constrained environments, but see the potential. Or come and talk to me if you have a no-code procurement requirement and you want us to build an app for you. We've just launched our contract management tool as the first one. Got another couple on the way. So if you'd like to see a demo of that, then also reach out, and we'd love to show you what it can do for less than the price of a conference ticket. We'll be back again, same time next month. Until then, take care wherever you are in the world. Be productive and disruptive. See you next time. Bye for now.